Episode 280 was special guest for the first time on the show. Finally. Going all the way back, weirdly enough, to like some of the first contender stuff. Wanted to bring him on. You know, definitely somebody that has been in the Overwatch scene far too long. Well, maybe that's not fair to say. Legday is here finally. Round of applause for Legday. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. Here to continue my overextended tenure, apparently, as a member of the Overwatch community.
That came across as like a bad thing, and it was just like actual brain vomit. But it was meant to just be.
It was Freudian, and we all understand that this is a gigantic sunk cost fallacy. But
yeah, as I continue to try to justify it and make any kind of sense of it, it probably just looks worse. So we're just gonna run with the fact that I hate Legday, apparently. So today I learned about myself. Yeah, we got some news. Toronto Overwatch World Cup. Apparently, there's a snowplow outside my window. What else is going on? How are things on your end of things, Legday? How is the off season treated you?
I've kind of just isolated myself from a lot of news, you know, like it's difficult to be able to actually rest in the off season if you continually try to just plug yourself into this, because during the off season, man, I've got the Twitter lists up, I've got the regular Twitter next to it, the subreddit over there, and then everyone's Twitch in the corner. I'm in the Overwatch Matrix, baby. I'm plugged in. I'm on CSI Overwatch. But during the off season, I tend to just, if someone talks to me about news, I'll learn that news as they tell me about it. But I did hear about the Toronto stuff, which has got me a little bit excited.
Excitement is good. Excitement is good. Yiska, are you excited?
Oh yeah, I think like it's. I think in many ways, it's kind of important that this team does well. I think it like a good North American representation that actually, you know, can win a tournament here and there or could go deep is probably not bad. Generally for viewership. Also because these guys, you know, like to bring a certain energy, and like I think fans of the Overwatch League and the success of the league will relatively quickly realize they should probably be rooting for Toronto Defiant or be active anti-fans and boost the traffic that way.
100%. I think it was I think Sen had mentioned on Twitter that, you know, they were like, you know, this is like a social media manager's dream team of just like the most rowdy, personable, like just like this is a team of personalities for the most part. So it's not what I necessarily expected, going back to some of the comments that, you know, Yiska and I had talked about, you know, regarding maybe the Atlanta versus Toronto, you know, debate.
Right.
Maybe I'll have to walk back some things there, but definitely an exciting team. Definitely something to look forward to. Obviously, we've got some World Cup stuff coming on. And maybe we'll get, you know, I think like they kind of alluded to it, maybe we'll get some flash, you know, live reactions to some of the teams that maybe he had missed. I think there are some moves that
let's lie a little bit. Let's lie on a couple of those.
Lie? Which is the wrong move? Is Smurf to Boston wrong, or did Sugar Free finally get signed? I don't know. We'll have to see. You get to pick. But episode 280, before we get into that, episode 280 is here kind of because you guys support the show. So I want to give a special shout out to our patron producers and that beautiful four-wheeler outside my window. Avril Vista Baby, Battle Crab, Refined Bean, Bronzebo Boohow, Picasso, Chris R34444, Kasha67, Lotion, Pork Chop, Sammy, Rexane, and our YouTube members. I am DRW, Brother, Adam L, Sagi Fumi, Ice Jello, Fire Element 6, AK Chris R. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Now, Toronto, we've got a team, finally. I think it was,
the worst kept secret in our history.
Yeah, it was it was pretty poorly kept secret. I don't know if there was somebody who actually like reported on it or not. But it definitely was just like out in the open. People, I think Sam was talking about it on stream at one point. I saw a clip of him just being like, I am moving to Toronto for undisclosed reasons. Not for the Overwatch League.
My girlfriend who lives in Canada.
Yeah. She doesn't go. She goes to other school, guys. Okay.
She goes to another league.
So if you've been under a rock or you haven't necessarily been plugged in, Hydron, Sam, Speedily, Kaluge, OG, Surmajed, and Ultraviolet are the founding, or at least the starting pieces of the 2023 Toronto Defiant. Legday, we'll start with you. I know that you mentioned prior to the show that you definitely have some histories with some of these players. So, is this something you're looking forward to?
Oh yeah, I think that Kaluge was a super pleasant surprise last year in having to shoulder a lot of the burden of being a solo tank for Shock for so long before they grabbed Mikey. And a 3-3-1 formation, it doesn't leave a huge amount of flexibility behind Kaluge, but I imagine that given that Casores was on Shock last year and worked with Kaluge, I think that he has a significant amount of faith in what Kaluge can do as a solo tank and knows probably when and where you would need to like try and source some augmentations for this particular tank line, because he's done it previously with Mikey as well. And I think it's fair to say that it was a reasonably successful season for San Francisco Shock with less tenured roster, but with some excellent scouting as well. And obviously I've had a lot of history and contenders with these players when they were on American Tornado, and Sir Majid's kind of like fallen in with this clique as well as like this high energy fragging player, and does allow for the potential to slip into these double flex support lines that admittedly was during our last off season moving into Overwatch 2, a little bit of this, it was this unicorn that a lot of teams seem to be building for, and in some cases did not actually materialize. So we saw things like, hey, Violet Zalucia, now this is a thing that's happening. But I think that there's a good amount of variety in this roster with the 3-3-1, which will make them at least vaguely meta-proof. And I think the on-paper skill of these players is something that can't be underestimated as well. Like Hydron, I think, was underhyped coming into the league and very much earned some acclaim through his Sojourn play. Speedily, probably on the opposite end. But it's very difficult as a player who's sort of like being babysat for most of a season with the promise of efficacy in X amount of months when they turn 18 to really live up to that hype. I think that Speedily was somewhat disserved by when his parents decided to have him. So unfortunately,
unlucky.
Speedily's parents really didn't plan this out very well.
Not efficient.
It could be. I think that Speedily being like part of a team's plan, not having to be slotted in as an afterthought or like as an augmentation later, is going to make him a lot more effective in like the effective placement in this roster as like an Echo player, which he's supremely good at, or even as a Tracer player. I know that Speedily and Hydron split time on Tracer quite often during North American contenders. And I think that having two players, maybe three if you count Sam, but I think that Hydron and Speedily are like a tier above Sam and the Tracer, who can pick up this hero, which in Overwatch history has been pretty ubiquitous in her usefulness, is going to do a lot for the potential DPS outlay of this team.
Oh, 100%. I think that like having that extra like Tracer player, God forbid, we walk into like a Sojourn Tracer, we did have that patch, and we'll probably gloss over that a little bit, but it doesn't seem like Sojourn's necessarily going anywhere just yet. Tracer's still very, popular for the most part. It sounds like, teams are still playing with that quite a bit. Having that within your repertoire is definitely super successful. Yiska, for you, do you think that this is like what feels like a big marquee on the timeline currently? Is that like kind of what with Legday was saying, like this is like the AT core, we have some of the O2 players. Is this kind of like the narrative do you think that kind of lives up to the narrative hype that is kind of being established right now? Is it the same? Is it different?
Okay, so in the way what it's different, and it's kind of nice that it worked this way, is the only reason this core is now together as they are is because they want to. Right? That's only true to a degree for the Shock, where like Proper had a say in getting the other guys on, I suppose, but let's be honest, like that's a partnership team. You were going to recruit from O2 Blast anyway, right? So it feels like a lot of top-down stuff. They were also not shy to supplement from other teams, or like not bring at least initially, you know, like they filled up with Western players and whatnot, right? So that's very much a top-down approach. Here we have a team who really planned this out for a long time, right? Like, I feel like this is one of the biggest heists pulled on teams last season, that they just got like 1+0s, right? Like, that's a very unprecedented contract structure to be done through the entire league. My understanding is that their agent, if I'm not mistaken, it's Ferris, finagled that deal with them. I think that's a huge win for player agency, that worked to that degree. It's not like they, you know, had to really like lose out on salary because of that.
Right.
So I think like they that's the collective bargaining that I want to see.
Sure, agreed. Yeah.
But yeah, I think like the fact that they just came back together, realized their qualities, and had this plan in mind to eventually come back together once again under one team is super cool and super cool storyline. Whether or not it maintains the, you know, the best contenders teams from each region vibe 2 years later is a little bit different. Just because also everyone just grew a lot of, you know, there's some shedding here and there for some players, right? Like some substitutions on other ends. I think there's something transformational about which coaches are being called. Like, I mean, this is, I feel like, yeah, ship of Theseus, but I think this is sufficiently different, but we can always tap into the roots of history here. So yeah, I think this is a cool storyline. The coolest for me is that this is both merit-based and also friendship-based. That's a structure I can believe in then. And
do you think it's an augmentation to this team that like they all went out to different teams, they've all experienced different coaching styles and their own peers as well, and they're coming back together without like, I think that this team, when they're American Tornado from the second win time onwards, very clicky, right?
Yeah.
They're fairly insulated, and yes, well, they have friends all across the North American competitive spectrum. These guys have always kind of stuck together as a core of players who like playing with each other. And last year's heist, as you called it, they've kind of heisted knowledge as well. They've heisted the knowledge of the internal processes of these other teams and the different coaching styles they can compare and contrast and see which they might benefit the most from. Because, well, they do have Casores, who's worked with Krusty for like 2 or 3 years now, and that's obviously a huge boon to his own first proper head coaching. Obviously, he's done it in Contenders. His own first proper OWL head coaching position. He also has like all this data from his players about how they have been coached in the last couple of, the last year as well, and how that can be kind of implemented too.
I think that like I don't know if I'd subscribe to like the double agent, like all we, you know, AT is planted sleeper agents all across the league and now we're coalescing all the information together. I think it's more individual for the players, where it's just like, you know, oh, like I have this offer to go play here and I respect these players, so I'm gonna go there, and everybody kind of like the band breaks up, right? And then in a very, you know, kind of goofy anime way, they come back and they're like, I just liked playing with you guys. Like this league, you know, it's, you know, what's an extra couple, you know, salary dollar bills, you know, what's this Monopoly money that we're all playing for if we're not necessarily having fun? I think there's like this big realization throughout, maybe not esports, but at least in our neck of the woods in Overwatch, that, you know, there is a little bit more on the table than just money and, you know, prestige and like just running yourselves like dry, playing with people who you either can't necessarily effectively communicate with or just like don't jive with. And it, like you said, I feel like these guys just like playing with each other, and they're going to try to play with each other what seems like from here on out.
I think you were talking about like audience engagement with this team as well.
Yeah.
And they're kind of tapping into one of the age-old memes of Overwatch, which, if you guys remember, was Seagull's friendship team. It's like they're just some friends playing Overwatch together, baby. And I think that you can kind of take that motif and that meme, and it would be pretty strong with this team as well. It's like, yo, just a bunch of friends who might end up winning a tournament here or there.
Yeah.
So, like, having that camaraderie is definitely something that people can latch onto as an audience as well, rather than a team that's been classically constructed by the top down rather than the bottom up.
I also feel like, speaking of coaching styles, if you think about where these players came from, they essentially came from 3 different teams, and I feel like we have every part of the spectrum represented here, right? Like we have like Atlanta, and they like are famously a more player-led team, and the players like decide strategies among them. Even though you would probably say that Gaeta always had like a position where he always, you know, was already coaching to a certain degree. So this is more like the players dictate the strategy. Then there's the mid parting where it's like Shock takes both into account. Kasor said that I can't help but feel that Majed and Hydron kind of won the gulag and like got out, like got out, and like from I assume like they of course I'm being a little bit dramatic here describing Ganba's coaching style, but famously like Hydron didn't have an easy time on that Mayhem roster.
Probably not, no.
Having to fight past Exy and whatnot. So also kudos to him that he managed that. Had someone asked me to bet in that team, and with Ganba being the coach, I think he likes the heavy grind. That speaks to me that Hydron was capable of that. So yeah, I think that's a certain range of experiences that these players bring back to the team. I think they will also find that they became very different people, and not least, I think we've successfully navigated around that point. But I would say one of the guiding personalities of that team, and arguably the most skilled player here, is missing, right? In Reiner. And for my money, let me go through the list. Yeah, I think last year probably the best player would have been the best performing player for my money, out of all of these Toronto guys now, right? Mm-hmm. You could probably argue with either Kalush had a good season, and then Hydron certainly too, right? Everyone else, I think, like for me, Reiner first half of the season was definitely an MVP candidate, and then
he was my rookie of the year candidate after midseason.
For sure.
Like, yep. Okay.
Oh,
yeah. For sure. Like he was definitely up there as well. So like that's and as I understood it, or as I understood the memes from back then, to be more accurate, I feel like he was also a pretty important figure in the social fabric of that team, right? Like he was like this football player leadership figure to a degree, right? So I feel like this is a pretty big hit for this team. And of course, all the best to Reiner. I think he went on records on Reddit saying that he has a medical health issue. And yeah, all the best. Hopefully you come back, because, I mean, let's be honest, like that's the second coming of Super in many ways, right? As far as like Western main tank candidates for literally MVP trophies.
Mm-hmm. I can speak circumstantial evidence to Reiner being the leader. Back when we were doing contenders interviews and like seeding selection shows and stuff, it was always Reiner who would be the designated talkie boy from American Tornado. The others weren't as comfortable talking, but Reiner definitely sort of stood out in that group as the spokesperson or leader who would represent them all, and they were very happy with Reiner representing them.
And I think a lot of the community sentiment, any kind of like Reiner antis out there, there's like, oh, but what about the Junker Queen? And it's like, yes, of course, there are like certain heroes that like people are not necessarily, the greatest at. And like, I think that's
what about Hanbin and the Winston?
Right, exactly. Right. Like, and I think that everybody's going to have those like weak points, but that doesn't mean that like this isn't like a. I think I'd even go out on a limb and say like one of these unicorn-esque tanks where they really are worth their weight, and like you want them on your team. If you have somebody like someone like a Smurf, a Hanbin to an extent, that can just flex all over the place. Reiner did showcase that. Yes, was there a few gaps here and there that I think you could probably iron out and have some sort of like denial of. You could probably work through it, given that ranked is out now. There's more time to like scram. You're not necessarily working on like old builds of the game that, you know, the league is kind of passing over to teams. Like Reiner definitely should have aged well. And obviously if there is medical issues and, you know, if he's talked about that publicly, then, you know, again,
I will say definitively that Reiner could have worked through it, because remember, this guy's a DPS player. He was a
Yep.
widow specialist on Ghosts.
Yeah.
That was the big thing that, you know, I think coming into last year, I was kind of asking around for a couple people, and I remember talking to Hirix in particular, and he's like, yeah, Reiner's cracked. Like, he's got like a really deep hero pool, big playmaker, can be a little aggressive, but like definitely somebody you want on your radar, can do like everything. We've seen him play ball, started as a DPS, like you said. Like, this is like a really, really talented player. So hopefully, you know, this isn't super serious for him. Hopefully he can come back. Hopefully he still wants to come back, because I think there are plenty of teams in the league that could seriously benefit from that kind of talent. And I do think, to Yiska's point, that this is it's not like a horrible thing for Toronto, because I do think Kalush probably is going to do fine. I think he surprised me quite a bit coming in from like the old timey memory of him kind of playing a lot of the flex tanks. I thought his Winston was a little conservative, but definitely like serviceable. Again, playing in that old kind of situation, in that old system where like he didn't have a ton of time to practice. Not everybody was able to scrim all the time. There wasn't ranked ladder to grind out the mechanics on these certain heroes. So I definitely think Kalush, a lot of these tanks are probably just going to like level up exponentially. And I think he'll be fine. But yeah, having a unicorn like Reiner is definitely like a huge luxury that is kind of missing here.
This is pure Kalush propaganda, but I feel like he's going to be able to play more aggressively with this team because of collective ego.
Sure, yeah.
Like, American Tornado as a team, when they were in contenders, yes, it's a different beast in terms of a level of competition, but they just felt themselves so much that they would make stupid plays that would work because they were all in on being the memers. They were all in on being the trolls. And I think that Kaluj is going to be, like, OG's going to be in there with him, making the most stupid dive in human history, right? And that's what's going to make it potentially a lot more of a lot more space for Kaluj to be an aggressive tank.
Definitely.
Sure. I just want to finish because, like, I think this is an important point to make.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm setting my spawn point on the hill to die on that Reiner had a great introduction season into Overwatch League.
100%.
And I feel like it really is not valued as much in that. And that, by the way, goes for the entirety of Glatz. That this team has been undervalued in terms of what it was capable of achieving just because it was not great in the playoff meta, which they barely ever were very early into the metas, right? So yeah. I feel like especially knowing, or it sounds like he already had those persisting medical issues that he played through. I mean, hats off. One of the most impressive Western rookie seasons I in recent memory. And definitely like all the best. Yeah, all the best in fixing your health.
Yeah, quick recovery. Hopefully it's nothing too serious, and hopefully get him back in the league again if he so chooses to.
Oh, a quick circle back on the Hydron grind set you were talking about as well. There's a very fun and engaging little Twitter thread that Hydron's been doing, competing for #1 DPS spot in America in the rank ladder with a Symmetra one trick. Seemingly, it's been a very amusing back and forth. They've been swapping this position like twice daily, and they've been documenting it the entire way.
That's hilarious. That it's a Sim one trick of all characters these days. It's the Sims.
That kid is hilarious, dude. Like.
Yeah.
When I first did the first interview with him, he picked up the call, had his camera on, and he was already like standing on his chair and went like this to the camera, like, "Hey!" And we're like, we have literally never spoken, and I'm a like mid-30s man. Like, good for you, buddy. Like.
Hydron to open this up to the Zoomers does have Riz.
I was
yes.
Give me back the brain cell.
Yeah.
The team in general, and I think this kind of goes back to what you were saying. Like, this is a team that is gonna like live or die by like the proactivity and the fun and I think as vapid as this tends to be, and something that I tend to criticize people about, like there is a lot of energy in this team that I think like if Kasaurus and like the environment's the right, level of serious, but also not super serious, and they don't take themselves super seriously, I think this is going to be not only a great thing for the league to kind of just like stick a camera in front of and just be like, and go, but also is going to be like a very competitive team. I know I'm on record saying that I thought Toronto was going to be quite good, maybe even top 5, maybe even beating Atlanta. I assumed Reiner was on this team. Without Reiner, I have to walk back like top 5. I don't even know if they can necessarily battle with Atlanta with some of those developments going on. But Legday, for you, obviously, you mentioned that, you're not necessarily super up to date, but like this has to be a team that you have a lot of faith within, right?
I have a lot of faith in this team. I think that where they're really going to either make or break is in how they react to losses. Because I think that this is a team that will have a good chance against teams that are above them.
Sure.
And will absolutely stomp teams that are below them. I think that it's one of those teams where their play style, if it holds over from American Tornado, will absolutely shit stomp anybody who can't react to absolutely crayons for brains aggression. Whereas when they start to encounter these walls where their aggression can be rebuffed slightly, the ability to dictate their playstyle on the fly and change over to places where maybe there's a little bit more respect for the opponents is going to dictate how well they can play against like your top tier teams, or at least your more experienced teams, like Boston. I know they have a lot of veterans who are unlikely to react in a panicked way to the kind of aggression that Toronto Defiant have, and that's where I think a lot of Kasaurus' job is going to be in figuring out how to play against those who are less likely to panic.
Couldn't agree more. I think that that's going to be the big like telltale sign of the coach's impact for this team in particular. I think it's always like a very interesting topic to kind of go over of like how do we tell like what a coach is actually doing? Like, do we go off of results? Is that necessarily even fair to both the players and the coach and like what they've done in both individually and as a team? But like you're saying, if by the end of the season we can see that like this is a team that is keeping mentally anti-fragile in some ways and is staying the course, I think like they've got like a really good thing going for them. Yiska, for you, do you want to lambast me for walking back my Defiant take?
No, I still think like it would have been challenging even with Reiner.
Maybe.
But yeah, no, like I think they will have a meta where they probably can go very far in tournaments. I think there's definitely, I mean, okay, there's some variables there, but like theoretically you would have to say like 6 is realistic. 7th maybe. Oh, maybe even 5th. Like it definitely can happen, right? 5th, 4th. Yeah. Depending, and I think I would very much echo the point of sort of mental management and also the role of snowballing very good early results. And then, I mean, if they start rolling and then can get into their groove and they're also like just getting into people's heads and actually like that's a team that will style on you even if you're a top team. Right? And like get into your head and
if you show weakness.
Yeah. Like they definitely are selfless spawn camping like it's 2016, right? So
it do be feeling like a Brad team, right? It do be feeling like you said, like we're pushing spawns, we're typing in the chat. Maybe we don't even cap King's Row point A immediately. Maybe we let you recontest just to beat you again, right? Like there is like they kind of said, like there is like this riz about this team that like they're just gonna like play with you a little bit just because they find it fun and like they're engaged with it. That it is gonna be must see Overwatch, but in that kind of same context, it feels like tied within this season in particular in some facets. Like there are a lot of like former team narratives, right? Where it's like, we're already seeing some of the players go on Twitter where it's like, oh yeah, Defiance, Defiance gonna have to play Shock like day one, or Kalush is gonna have to play his old team, and Sam's gonna have to play his old team, and there's that like not necessarily rivalry, but there is history, right? Is there maybe another like string of history that you guys are looking forward to this season? Maybe like a Boston, like London battle, or maybe like Smurf playing against his old team. Is there anything that you guys are super excited for about this season with some
Toronto,
of
London for me. Toronto, London. The redo of the 2020 Gauntlet, which was one of the best competitive games we've ever had in Tier 2.
True, yeah.
Even though, like, I always feel some manner of trepidation. I'm like, yo, American Tornado, we're back, baby. Like, we all remember what happened with 2021 London. It's like, yo, British Hurricane, they haven't lost a single map, baby. They're coming into Overwatch League. They're going to absolutely dominate. It's Europe's time to shine. And they went, what, like 1-24? They only beat Vancouver Titans in their last match of the season. It was a very sad day to be a European contender. It was a sad year to be a European contender stand. So it's not exactly the same teams again.
Sure.
But I think that I would love to cast that match because like Lemon and I have so much history with those two.
It only feels right.
It's so cool to be able to cover that.
Yeah.
It's good for you.
I think on top of everything, like I think those players playing any of their past teams should probably be a lot of fun. Like I could totally see Hydron just like teabagging Merit and going like, "What? You replaced me with that bum?" And
sure, yeah, like that's the stuff that we need. I think, not to completely go on a tangent, but I think Arnold from Gen G or Soul Dynasty in our neck of the woods really kind of was talking about recently about like the sports entertainment aspect of things, and like this, we do kind of need to start selling our fights, right? In boxing and MMA, there is this aspect of like, yeah, everybody's a martial artist, we get that. But like what puts butts in seats is like being able to get out there, stir the pot a little bit. Nobody likes serious drama. Nobody needs to be throwing chairs through buses and like injuring people. But to get on the microphone, cut a promo, give the fans a little bit to to grab hold of. And like you're saying, I think Hydron onto Florida is probably a good one as well, right? Like, is there anything for Boston for you? I feel like that's just so historic in so many ways, right? You've got the Bird Ring, former London, you've got Smurf with Shock. Like anything else?
One of them I really want to see, not on Boston, but like Fearless versus Fuel is like the one for it, because it's like the battle of the brothers. It's the same thing we had with Kaluj versus Reiner, but with the plebs able to interact with it. Kaluj versus Reiner, like, for a lot of us, it was a very cool matchup to see these brothers in arms go up against each other. But a lot of people, like, they understandably didn't have the time to watch all of this stuff in Tier 2. It didn't have the investment there. But the thing is, with Fearless versus Hanbin, if you've been watching Overwatch League, even passingly, you have become invested in these players because they were just at the top and demanded your attention. And now this holy tank duo has finally been split up and onto probably rival. Like, do we know if Hanbin's on Fuel? I don't know, but I'm assuming
that's
so.
official.
Yeah. So we have not only the brothers in arms who have been always together, this absolute titan of a tanking unit, but now they're on rival regional teams as well.
Yeah.
That is the one that I want to see Overwatch League sell more than anything else.
Yeah.
That, like, in a Texas homestand, I don't know exactly who gets the rights to it these days. Like, I know they like trade back and forth, like parents, like the divorcee parents, right? I don't know who's got the kids this weekend, but like it needs to, like, that has to be like the marquee. Like you're saying, I love how you're building that up, where it's the two former teammates leading two domestic rivals battling against one another. Like that's gonna sell out like day one. Like that has to sell out day one. Like, I know that things are doom and gloom right now for a lot of people and everybody's big doomer pilled, but like, if you put that out there and sell tickets behind it, I really believe that like Texas is going to show up. I think they've always showed up. And I think like that's, I like where your head's at. I like that a lot. Yiska, for you, is there another one or not so much?
Well, I'm mostly also really interested in how like coaching legacies move on, right? Like that's like can Rush do it again without that entire roster? Who's he adding? I think the departure of both Brad and Deepay, dude. At some point, I said it. I believe I said it before in the podcast, but like that's a blockbuster movie of how these guys negotiated against each other during the off seasons, and eventually, like I want to sit down with both of them and just talk through each off season and how they strategized and how they got, for years competed for the best Western talent. Now it feels like there's kind of for me this vacuum of that. And then I feel like we have a couple of pretty cool coaching personalities. I think also this is probably like we have no idea what Moon's cooking, but like,
true.
I mean, this is also the point where like if you want to show that you're a great coach, like you got to do it with more than just like the absolute best like gold standard talent, right? Yeah. And just like keep them.
That's how we decided Chris is coach of the year, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, Sure, you can turn that filet mignon into something pretty good pretty quickly, but like, what are you gonna do with some carrots and some I don't know PVA glue? What are you gonna make out of that, chef? Huh?
You're gonna have to Coach MacGyver this into some absolute blockbuster of a team because, like Yiska is saying, like there are so many talented coaches. Ray's coming back. He's got Spark money to play with. Moon's still in the fold. Rush is still cooking things. He's got Hanbin back in the stable.
Gamba.
Chris is not, a slouch by any means.
Soros getting his own.
Soros is getting his own. Like there's so many like junk. Yeah, Junk Buck. Well, weirdly enough, I'm gonna go on a minor tangent, but like I don't think 9K and Krusty. I don't think like 9K gets enough credit personally. I know that like Krusty's like head honcho. I get it. Trust and believe. Like he's on the Mount Rushmore of Overwatch coaches without a doubt. But like, I don't know if 9K's really ever been given a platform. I don't know if like enough people under him have been, questioned about like, who is 9K? What has he done for them as a coach, or maybe even as like a teammate, let's say. Because I really, the more that I dig, the more that I see, the more that I think a lot of this stuff gets pointed back to him. I remember the stuff about Paris. I remember a lot of the Krusty things, like
the Shockwave's comment recently was nice. Did you see
Shockwave
that?
Too.
Like Shockwave
I
said,
didn't dive into it, but I know
9K is so smart, it's almost cringe. That's what he said.
That's the most player line. Like that's the most like player compliment.
Yeah. Right? Because it's like
to add some lads to this particular conversation. I think that's something that myself and a lot of content creators around OWL could really do with is like immersing ourselves in European football a little bit, because they are so good at creating the manager narrative or like the backroom narrative, where like sometimes the players do take a little bit of a back seat there because they kind of try and frame a match more cerebrally between two managers and coaches, and they do a really good job of building the mythos of these brains behind the action.
That's 100% true. And by the way, that's the easiest shit to do if you talk to Rush. Dude, that guy gives you the quotes like line by line. Like he keeps firing. Like I don't know if Dia is the best translator in the world and she always like has the most mythologized interpretation of whatever Rush is saying. Or like he's just like he has a different vision of the game. Like I talked about it before. Like it feels like he has the best pieces in the world, but also because he handpicked them. And then everyone is just like a cog in the machine. No egos. We're just doing it. Oh, Hanbin is the vocal leader. Yeah, that's then the engine, but not really a privileged part, right? And then, like, he's the one coach where when I ask the question, I don't know the answer that's coming. I have no idea where it's going, right? He's a Pep type, I would say, like Guardiola. Wouldn't mean anything to you, like sort of like
I know it's like a football coach, or manager rather.
And I think like the way like Barcelona played back in the day this is also a boomer take.
Football pill.
It's not just a football pill, it's also a boomer take because it's like very early Messi.
Okay.
But
topical though.
He was a Messi fan before it was cool.
Hey.
Yeah, and then okay. I would be amiss to also not mention the Glad's coaching stuff. I think that's still like a pretty big one. I think Smash is probably underrated. FaZe as a head coach, like that was once again for my money, absolutely top 3 season. You could like in overall performance, a top 3 team last year. I would argue they probably had a better season than the Shock even. So like maybe the second best team last year. Pretty close to Fuel overall for my own estimation, because okay, here me being like match format pilled. I feel like winning mid-season was a pretty bigger achievement than winning playoffs, just based on the format and who was there, and like not getting into the five-day gamble. So
yeah, that's fair. Like the Kiriko patch definitely is not my favorite thing ever, but yeah, I guess that's fair to say.
So like I feel like Glatz overall had a very successful season, and I'm intrigued because now we get more of the idea of the teams that, you know, that there have been leaks and whatnot, but like this team on paper, it's hard to make sense of, right? Like Dante is the solo tank. I don't think anyone saw that coming. Then they brought in Lastro. Of course, Kev is still there. Who else is someone else announced? I don't want to.
Astro and Lastro.
Yes, Astro is still there. Okay, that's all still very good, right? But at the same time, you're also trying to replace Shu, right?
Yeah, that's tough.
You're trying to replace Happy or Aunts, right? Like there's big shoes to fill. And I'm kind of intrigued what kind of solutions this coaching staff comes up with. I personally think that they, this time, for the first time in a long time, don't have a top 3 pound-for-pound roster in the league.
It's again, it's possible. We've kind of talked about on the show that like the Lastro move is a little, you know, it's not bad. Like it's no shade to Lastro. Definitely, you know, for my money, if I had why am I blanking on the name of like the individual awards that we give our role stars? There we go. I had to talk through it. Lastro was definitely like high on my list. I think Eric maybe can back me up. I think I voted for him, or I would have voted for him for role star. I thought that like he was a really surprising piece for the Houston core. Someone that I didn't really suspect was going to cut it on the main support position, and like genuinely was a reason why like Houston got through some of those like earlier season matchups, which was pretty intense. And yeah, Glad's is there's pieces that they could pick up that like would make me excited, would make me want to see like what's really cooking under the hood. But I do think there is some, you know, there's room for like some young players in here. Like you have Kev, you have, you know, all these veterans that have been around for so long. I always kind of harken back to what Chris, and I think both Chris and Nuki had said this recently, or not recently, but in the past, that like having a good balance of, you know, veterans and young talent to kind of like balance each other out in some ways, where like the young players are like lighting the fire and like driving and like having all of this motivation to like grind and get better. It makes the work environment really positive. Like when everybody around you is like working hard to like achieve a goal, it makes you want to work a little bit harder. But in that same sense, like the veterans can kind of like temper that expectation and make sure it's healthy and make sure that it's, you know, a little bit more constructive in some ways. So it's, I could see Gladiators maybe making some moves there, but there again, it's like, okay, well, but who else is left? What other kind of like S tier, you know, rookies are there to kind of snag up? It's not impossible to see Glad's kind of like step back into the fold as like this juggernaut of a, you know, NA powerhouse that we kind of like learned them to be last year. But like you're saying, to kind of circle back to the discussion, it is kind of on the coaches, right? Like it's the people in the power positions that make these moves. It's, you know, what else do they do with this roster? Glad's has always been a team that like does spend, you know, some money. Like they throw some cash around. So it kind of remains to be seen, but there are just so many, like I was thinking about talking about this last show, but there are just so many. Or it wasn't last show; it was the show with Kenobi that we talked about. Ray coming back. Check that out because Kenobi dropped some insight there. But like, there's so many good coaches this season. It feels like probably one of the best like coaching seasons we've had. Is that fair to say? Like, just the density of talent.
I think so. Just to once again harp on the Gladiators.
Yeah.
I think that they're also in one of the best positions to indulge in what we've been talking about, which is the coaching narrative, because they've got such a good coaching staff we talked about before. But if you guys watched the video for announcing Dante, they clearly have, while it was a meme announcement, they clearly have some significant interest in creating well-produced and well-written videos that include like a lot of like cool cinematography stuff or just cool background Easter eggs that I think would be really interesting in being able to properly being able to like personify coaches. One of the things that I've really missed in Overwatch League, which I really like in the playoff scenarios, is map picks. Not just because it makes games closer, but I think the map picks are one of the easiest ways that we as casters have to present evidence of a coaching staff's mental processes and the flavor that they give over to a team, which I think is lost in Overwatch League's like set maps for a lot of the regular season. I didn't really have a point for this. I'm just ranting about it. But
no, I'm here for
I
it.
wish that was the way the entire way through, because I like to talk about coaches' thought processes for that, and it lets you have a fantastic post-interview question as well. Like, why did you take this team to a map where maybe they've got a great win rate, you guys have a bad win rate? What did you think would be the differentiator as you decided to go to this map? And I think it would just give a lot more insight into how the coaches affect their teams.
I have debated with a couple coaches from seasons past on this because it definitely has some cons, right? Like, there are definitely problems with just giving like an open map pool to coaches and they just kind of get to pick, and like, it does increase the dilemma of what and where do you practice. It's difficult, right? But I'm so on board. I think the pros so significantly outweigh the cons in that way, where I think it's on the teams to create healthy practice environments to kind of, take some of those losses to kind of lean more into your strengths so that you aren't necessarily working yourself to the bone to practice all the maps evenly, because that's just not feasible. Hell, I remember going all the way back to like pre-dating Owl, where people are like, yeah, we don't practice TCP, bro. Like, it's not even worth it. Like, why bother? I just practice control and I practice hybrid and we win games. GG easy. We fusion uni this bitch, right? So it's like, I'm so totally on board with that, because it is like a direct, like you're saying, it's a direct coach's, hand. Like, this is the play that we're making. You can kind of build up narratives. I mean, again, I think we talked about this last show as well, where it's like, what's the one piece of like, not shoulder content, that's not fair to say, like the desk, what's one desk moment that everybody remembers last season? Custa kind of going a little bit in on the Justice, talking about like the or I think it was Sigma, or no, it wasn't Sigma, it was Ryan or Max Ryan on like Li Zhang on that like map 5 scenario when he goes on the big diatribe and kind of like is nitpicking here and there. And I'm like, yes, like this is the color commentary that I'm looking for. This is like the stuff that like excites me as a fan, and I feel like there's just so much like passionate about it, and there was this back and forth on Twitter, and it was kind of a little sports entertainment-y in some ways, but there is merits to both sides. I agree. Legday, I think there should be map picks. Yiska, do you like beats? Yeah, do you like beats? Beats good.
I don't understand the reference.
There's not like no, there's no. I was trying to plug you back in. I was just like, name a vegetable.
Oh, beats. Oh, right. Like,
yeah.
There's 7 words this could refer to in the English language, and the German probably doesn't understand the inflection of like. Oh, never mind. All good.
How do you feel about Lucio's ultimate?
Yeah, it could be that too. Be that too.
Yeah. And instead, you just confused me.
Yes.
I agree with your point on the broadcast stuff. I think I feel like I'm repeating myself every year, probably for the last 5 years. If everything is good, then nothing is, right? Like, you sometimes got to give a little bit of criticism here. I think there's a thing when in this community, like when you because everything tries to be framed so positively, if you stand out once with like a spicy opinion, everything gets so dogpiled because it's not like that's the one thing that stands out, that it really isn't a great experience to be in the limelight of that criticism, right? So I think, like, generally speaking, everyone just needs to take more risks in how that goes. Like, of course, be calculated, like, have a spicy opinion, shit talk someone on their ability to play the game, but like, don't go beyond that, right? Like, that's the level that we should keep it at. There you can have your opinion. Like, in essence, like, this is all play. We're pretending. We're having pretend war here, right? Like,
I knew the second you said pretend, I was like, here comes the rant.
So,
Here's
like,
the pretend war rant.
Like, let's just, right? Like, let's get a little bit serious about the drama, but not to the point where it has any impact on anyone's employment or anything like that, right? Let's just throw a little bit of mud and then shower off after.
Yeah.
To muddy the water some more, I think that's actually a platform issue of Twitter. Because I think that critique content, especially like even if it's just over the top critique content, I did the Overwatch League Lowlight series for about 2 years, and people responded to that incredibly well on YouTube, where it was actually being posted. Because the thing about like a controversial take on Twitter is that someone could just read it and they're done. They've formulated their opinion on it. I think on YouTube, or at least in longer form video, or even in picture form, maybe go post it to Flickr, see how they feel. That when people actually have to put in the investment to like either obtain entertainment from this product, 'cause it's a video that's being shown to you, or be made to think about it, they get a lot more engagement from that. Because lowlights, I think, while the views weren't amazing, it was in Overwatch's dead season. I don't generally tend to look at that, but on like a per viewer response to it, it was really good. People like me just ranting about how teams were shitting the bed here and there, and I don't think teams held it against them either. Last year I didn't do it because no replay viewer, so what can you do? But I think that kind of content is very good for people as well, because it creates a level of relatability as well. Because you're like, hey, those pros, they're just as fucking stupid as I am. That's fantastic.
And it's just funny. Like, it's just like America's Funniest Home Esports videos, where it's like, oh yeah, you're supposed to be like this pro skateboarder and you messed up your grind. Haha, shucks. Like, it's just kind of goofy sometimes. And like, you might not be super into the game, or you might not be even super into the esports, but like, if you know that like pro athletes, you know, big quotations for anybody who's like, sports, there is this funny aspect to it, where, you know, you go and look at like football faux pas, where like somebody like misses a goal that's like very obvious, and it's just kind of like humor. It's just like you said, it's relatable in some ways. It's kind of funny. There is.
You don't watch football, do you, Jay?
No, I don't.
But you saw the picture of that goalie holding the Golden Glove to his dick, right?
I did see that.
Like, these are the kind of universally funny things which transcend fandoms and can really. I'm not saying that opened football to a whole new audience, but it certainly makes you just engage with the subject matter for a little bit, even if it's just
That's my long-held belief, that it wasn't actually that big of a problem that we migrated to YouTube. The biggest problem was that we're also being broadcast on Disney. Because, like, if you remember back, like, what are some of the biggest memes? It's Prophet, like, flipping the camera off, and Sex Big Dick, right?
Yeah.
And ever since then, like, everyone's just, like, trying to keep their head low, like, not do, you know, like, not really try to get a fine or whatever. I feel like we've fostered a pretty boring culture there. I think we should just go in every game if possible.
I think we're working out of it. I think we're slowly easing off the boring gas. And again, I'm going to be very clear when I say this. I'm not saying this league needs to be edgy. I'm not saying this league needs to like tap into any kind of like negative social media, momentum that's out there. It just you just gotta like
cheeky, not toxic, right?
Yes, well put. Like, be cheeky, poke some fun, have a couple jabs, you know, you don't have to be actual enemies. If you are, then so be it. But have fun with it. It doesn't have to be super serious. And by fun, I'm not talking about like popsicle sticks and funny faces, but like just, you know, let that personality come through. And it's tough, like you said, it's tough to kind of have that, you know, to stick out, to be the nail that kind of like wiggles out of the board and like have the community see and react to it so harshly. It could, because that's probably the easiest way to get hammered back into the board and be like, oh, nope, I'm not doing that again. That was not fun. That was not nice. Didn't like that. But it is for the benefit, I think, of everybody. And I'm not asking for martyrs, but I think it's the way that we grow, right?
Also, like we're what, at 65% South Koreans now in this league. Like like I've always felt Danny was at his best when he was doing that shoulder content stuff with those players.
Oh yeah,
like he's like super fun at parties. Like he just like gets those players out of their own, you know, camera shyness and whatnot. And like some of my favorite content last season was just like people taking the time to talk to Korean players and translate it for us. Like the which in hindsight now is interesting, the Philly and Seoul
Philly stuff,
sit down, right? Like where they talked about and like had these little cards that they held up and whatnot. Like I feel like we are missing out on 60% of the players in this league in terms of context. Like it's literally crazy where people like someone will tell me something, I'm like, oh wow, this is a rumor, and I'll just talk to a random Korean netizen and they'll just go like, oh yeah, that has been on the message boards for like 2 months now, and nobody knows here. It never transcends the cultural barrier. There's no osmosis going on. It's crazy.
There's very little, I would say. I think there is some where I'll see like somebody posting from like Weibo, like cross posting, I mean,
right,
where like they get it from Weibo, they do like a rough translation, somebody like, you know, irons it out in the comments, and you kind of parse information that way. But I agree, like there have been definite, you know, stuff that has gone on or you know, passed along that necessarily hasn't made it here, or it came late, or it didn't come at all. And it is fascinating to have somebody like Danny kind of bring those players out of their shell, because like I would definitely agree, definitely somebody who needs, I think, their own just owl budget. Like just give Danny his budget and let him run with it, because I think he's just golden in front of the camera.
I think there's a content niche as well that could be filled by someone who's not inside the league, which is like the Korean correspondent, where you could do like your phone news stuff, get a lazy editor on it as well. You just report random rumors. Like obviously this probably couldn't be affiliated with Al because it would just be silly rumors, but like just the rumor mill of Korean message boards. If you were bilingual, being a Korean correspondent, like put on a suit or a blouse, get a fake microphone, do something TikTok style in front of a green screen. I think that would be really cool content to just give some insight. And I promise, whoever has the means to do it, I will not call you out for copying Apex. Just do the Korean karaoke, man. That's like such a cool part of the culture. And like we have these battles. We have our phony wars that Yiska was talking about. Why don't we have phony karaoke wars between these teams? Out of the 3 Korean players you have on each team, who's got the better pipes? Just pit them against each other outside of Overwatch as well. Because that's how we learn what the people are rather than the players are.
As much as I think maybe even people in our community might roll their eyes and say like, oh, like, yeah, like that's just not content for us. It's content for the people who we need to tap into. It's to create career fans. It's to make those memories. I still remember Quartermain rapping God knows what. I think it was
Quartermain's got pipes, dude.
Right, exactly. Like,
flow.
That is a name that nobody will remember. Kudos to you, dude. Drop a comment in the section, do the algorithm, all that good stuff. But like that doesn't happen unless you give people those opportunities. And I know people from way back in the day that are like, oh, I remember when like Toby and Jaehong did their like ballads and it was goofy and it was memorable. I agree. Like, in some ways, so show matches are fun. Like exhibitions are a great time, and like we've gotten better at like bigging them up. But like we've seen enough Overwatch. We watched a whole season of Overwatch. I want to see America's Got Talent Overwatch edition. I want to see, you know, what makes these players. You know, I think I'm leaning into what Legday is talking about. Like maybe we'd need like an owl karaoke competition where we just send in a representative from each team and we just let them have it on stage. And maybe there's judges, maybe Legday, and you know there's a panel and you golden buzzer them. I don't know. Like it's a content idea. That's all I'm saying.
Like I think that if All-Star Weekend were to happen again, it should be like 30% gameplay.
100%.
Do the All-Star teams and then have a sack race. I don't know, anything. Do some wrestling in fat suits.
Yeah.
Something that is not just the game but shitter.
I feel like we definitely could do better with more entertaining, but I also feel, and okay, this might be a little bit controversial, but I think we could do with meaning in injection. And the easiest way, or the most effective way I've felt this comes, like you can deliver, is losers interviews. Like still to this day, one of the most meaningful or important interviews I probably ever did was Jexy after, like, he was on the Fuel, and I think they lost against the Outlaws, if I'm not mistaken. And, like, I just asked him, like, what didn't work today? And he's like, my performance. And he was clearly very close to, like, he was not very emotional about it, but he was, like, you really got what it means to these players to play in this league. Like, this is an underrated thing because you do not really feel what it means to guys that sit down 10 to 14 hours, 6 to 12 months a year, depending on what kind of a player type you are, and go hard and chase your dream with increasingly poor pay for the chance at being the best at something, right? And they willingly take this chance now. A lot of them are highly talented. All of their development is now a little bit delayed, but they're taking that chance of realizing their dream, and sometimes it doesn't work, right? It means something to be there. It's very hard to create meaning only from moments of great victory because they just equalize out. You get dull to that experience. As you introduce what it means to these guys to also lose in this moment, that's where the meaning comes from.
I bet there's a reason that one of the most resonant clips in Overwatch history is like Super at Bala, right? Just like tearing up as he's at the desk, just like, fuck, man, fuck. Like like you said, when things are portrayed only through victory, it's the same problem as the everything is good. Like without despondence, elation means nothing.
Yes.
And I've tried to do this in my casting as well. I called it the quantitative easing of compliments. In that if I compliment every play as being a player popping off rather than a player on the enemy team fucked up, like shutting that down, then it doesn't mean anything when I actually compliment a player because, hey, like they said, someone's good again. Yeah, we know they're good. They're an Overwatch League. But what does it really mean to excel? Because excelling inherently means rising above people. As much as everyone is special, you need to rise above to truly be someone who's worthy of note.
Here's the problem, right? You will never in a cast be capable of catching the absolute truths. And that's not a problem. As much as other people want to make that a problem, it's not the problem. Like you being able to see something in the moment, I think that I understand it like viscerally from my point of view that it really sucks to get something wrong, get called out for it, to also know that it's wrong, and then you adjust your behavior in order to like take less risks, and then you'll just say everything is good. I think like you almost have to decouple completely from that feedback that you're given, because implicitly you will notice people actually like that content. I think, unfortunately, like negativity is, everyone seems to understand that negativity sells well, but there's productive negativity.
Yes.
And like I don't really care that much that the call in the moment is not perfect. That's fine with me. You just gotta take it on the chin if someone calls you out, and the players will even call you out. That's fine. That's okay. It is almost. I know I'm asking much. Also, your profession, Legday. But you almost have to take it on the chin. I think there's a lot of.
I'm someone who's definitely been on the receiving end of players being unhappy.
Do you feel it's hard to push through that? Like when you then receive the public backlash of that moment, it's super hard to not adjust your behavior based on that, right?
It is hard to adjust to that. What I tell myself afterwards is that, it's okay because my casting is up for critique in the same way that their play is. Like, I am paid a good amount to talk about Overwatch. And in a legitimate economy that doesn't have this frivolous stuff, that skill's worth nothing, right? Like, it doesn't actually do anything. The same way that, like, being good at Overwatch is worth nothing. But we're all getting paid real money, currency from corporations to be involved in this game. And I feel like it's okay for me to critique a person's play because it's their job to be good at it. Mm-hmm. And by the same coin, like, it sucks when people don't like that about my casting, but at the same time, it's their right to say that my casting doesn't work for them because I get paid to do that, and I get paid because they're listening. If they weren't listening to me, then my skill is worthless. So I think that it does hurt when someone calls me a shitcaster, but at the same time, hey, you're listening, so I get paid. So we're all able to critique each other, and so long as you're talking about the work I do rather than who I am, that is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I 100% agree. Yeah.
Yep. And that was definitely something that, like, I, not to completely like brown nose, but like that was something that I felt stood out with your and Lemon's cast last season. That, like, I was like, this is like a refreshing take of, like, this feels like a not sugar coated, but like, a real, like, take on what's happening in front of me. Like, this is a game that is kind of dog shit. These players, not playing super great. These players playing quite well. Like, it felt more, what's the word? My brain is screaming honesty, but that's not fair to say to, like, all the other casters who I wholeheartedly believe, like, they're speaking, like, their honest truths. But like, it was this it was refreshing. It was nice to hear you guys come out and not, by no means was this like lambasting the players. I think people take that much too far. But I agree with what you said. Like, if everybody's special, nobody's special. And like, it's inherent to competition sometimes that, like, somebody has to be a loser. Somebody has to come second. Somebody has to underperform. And it's okay to say that. That's kind of what, in some ways, we're missing with a lot of these narratives, that, we should be able to kind of come out and say, yeah, Toronto's been frankly a terrible franchise for a long time. For as much as they've done and for as much money as they've thrown at this, it's been mid as hell.
Toronto was the team I was most likely to forget when I was listing Overwatch.
Yeah,
games
like,
last year.
They're just so milquetoast, and they try. God bless them, they try. But like, it's just so forgettable every year.
Yeah,
I get, like, in our community, we have like the whole "he messy" meme. Shout outs to, like, whoever like did that. You know who you are. But like, outside of that, like, Toronto, like, does anybody remember like the Toronto rosters? Does anybody remember when they like randomly went like Western for like a hot second? Like, no, because they weren't very good. And it's okay to say that. Should you go out and tell the players that they should do unspeakable things and spend, vitriolic webs? No, of course not. But it's okay to, like you're saying, like, to approach the profession, not the professional, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's just like something to usually run as life advice, right? Like, nobody needs to be personally attacked.
To counter brown nose on the Toronto Defiant, I am very excited for this roster because it's the opposite, right? And not only is it the opposite, but it's the opposite with the content infrastructure that Toronto has created, which seems really great. Like, they are very good at making things that are engaging about either their content creators or their players. Even when, like, we didn't get much in the way of, like, real communication because they're all Korean last year. But they still were putting out some really good stuff, and they go out and they use a production budget. They make something cool that, like I said before about Glads, it engages with proper cinematography. You get some good editing in there via proper professionals who are trying to make something look cool. They do expensive music licensing to make you feel something when you're engaging with their content. And that combined with how personable these players are might make Toronto Defiant a team that is impossible to forget.
Yeah. I think this is an idea that has been living rent-free in my head over the last couple of weeks. And it's also something that I feel like speaks very much against my self-conception, and it's painful. It's a painful pill to swallow, but the most interesting people in the world are not the ones with the most interesting ideas. The most interesting people in the world, or the most fan attracting, are people who are stylists, right? Like, you don't listen to Migos for the lyrics, right? Like, you barely listen to any musician at this point, or the masses, for the lyrics and the lyrical content. It's about the style and the uniqueness and the sound of how that is delivered, right? I would say that is true for casting. I think, like, not the most accurate caster is the best caster, the most loved caster. It's the guy that gets it with the most style, that resonates and evokes the most emotion, not necessarily through, like the logos, if you want. Like, it's that makes you feel something, right? And this is
on that particular note, like there was a little bit of discussion that I noted early in the owl season about my laugh, because I'm like a hyena getting ridden by a goblin, and the collective laughs of both of those. And like, some people liked it and some people hated it, but it made people like listen and engage with it regardless of how they felt about it.
Yeah. And I also feel like real talk, I don't think like I don't think Uber would say that about himself, but he's not the smartest like strategy reading caster. The interesting stuff about him is like that he can come up with something cool in the moment, right? Or something like that resonates with the moment and like, can turn that around in very little time. He's inherently a stylist more so than, like, and I feel like I'm frequently surprised when I get him on a podcast to talk about ideas. But like the real value there, and the most successful entertainers are stylists first, thinkers second in that sense. And in a way it bleeds together because they think about their style, of course. But I feel like we all crave authenticity in this, Instagram reality world. And to introduce, I think that's also why someone like Bren resonated so hard with the fan base, right? Like, it's just like unapologetically himself, whatever self that is. Yeah, yeah, that's like wearing that on your sleeve is amazing. Like, and nobody, like that's why like when everyone was like, oh, they're phoning it in. Well, they're still Sideshow and Bren. They still have that style, and it still resonated. Right, like that, you can't take that away from them. People would watch them on whatever they would shotcast, right? So I think fostering that style and like going there and then having them be informed by ideas of others, I think it's always a great idea for those guys to just like reach out to the guys that do the thinking work, as in coaches, for instance, and have some crosstalk there. Have a vibe check there, the important stories that are happening there. That's all fine, right? Like, once again, I think there are people that make it work, that make being smart about the game interesting as well. That also works. I feel like for instance, Avril, like, to only say like he resonates with the crowd because he like dictates who the MVP is not true, right? Like, he's also someone that very much leans into the into calling out when something's bad, and also like being respected by the players when he says something, right? So that works in that dimension as well, right? So it can work. It's just very hard. We need the full package, but yeah, I feel like, generally speaking, as we embrace these acts and probably also a little bit less, theoretically, at least in the contracts that we have, if you don't have sponsors, you don't need to hold back much, right? Like,
who's there to piss off?
Or like at least like you have a different demo that you now have to appeal to, especially with right, like, or can appeal to, and just have some fun with it, I suppose, right? Like if you're having fun, then it's very likely that someone else is having fun with you.
I think one of the things that was a big hurdle for me to try and get over in this season of Overwatch League, when I was looking at feedback, is trying to realize that like the Reddits that actually talk about casters are heavily predispositioned to want deep analysis.
Yes.
But the thing is, like, I ain't him. I'm not Avril. Like, Avril is a fantastic analytical caster, but we've already got an Avril.
Yep.
He's over there. He's popping off. And I don't have the time that Custer and Reinforce have to be able to put their massive brains to work and start chug this analytical engine along. And it was kind of freeing for me in my own like view of my own work to realize that people might not like that I'm not as analytical, but the audience that I can actively engage with and monitor are the people who really want that, but the people who just watch because it's something to watch, which for media is like the bread and butter. They like a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, some fun here and there, maybe a more basic explanation that's more accessible to someone who's not been watching this league for 5 years. And those are the kind of people who, if I want my job to survive,
yes,
it's my primary priority to serve and engage them.
I feel like that's an underrated part about why co-streaming is so successful, seemingly. Yeah. It's like, okay, you give someone, I don't know how many co-streamers there are, let's say in Valorant, do you give someone the choice of finding their favorite style out of like 150 co-streamers? Of course we will find a better market fit, like in terms of that than like other selections pretty quickly, right? And they are mostly just themselves. Either they feed off their, like I even think just being knowledgeable about the game or having the credit of being good about the game only takes you so far. Tarek is not big because he's like, a major champion and whatnot and past great player.
It's funny, okay?
He's also funny.
He's a goofy guy.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel like you have to have a wide variety, and you also you gotta have someone that can make, let's say, the shit games fun, right? Like you gotta have those guys. I mean, you have toilet bowls, right? Like you have toilet bowls that you gotta
some of the
get
best
through.
Overwatch. Some of my favorite Overwatch, like it was this 2021 with like or is this 2020? The Houston Boston like absolute like 7-game like garbage bowl that I can name you like on one hand how many times I've stood up while watching Overwatch. That game I stood up watching Overwatch, like the most engaged you could be.
Do you have Jerry rolling off Blizzard World 3rd just burned into your mind?
Hands up in the air. I'm doing laps around my room. Like it was a nightmare, but it was so much fun. And I think everybody in the community that was there that night watching that game can 100% agree that like it was electric. Whether you're rooting for one side or the other, it was must see Overwatch for like the absolute wrong reasons.
Like August 14th, right? The myth, the legend. Like we care as much, if not more, in regular season about the turd fiestas.
Yeah,
we need more
compared to the top teams going up against each other.
That's the worst part. Like that's why Toronto is so forgettable, because they're never absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, they're never bad, but they're not.
There's
good.
always apathy, like mid apathy, right? Like I think generally speaking, also let me defend a little bit my elitist friends here, because I feel still edgy kinship. I think they're also just doing their part of the entire spiel that we're having. Like everyone putting on their mask, playing the universe, and some of them have to be dickheads in order to make the entire experience full as well. Right? Like we just all gotta be the players in our own little play. I think it also would probably be less fun, but within reason, right? I think I mind elitists way less than the guys that are in your DMs, just like.
Of course.
Spouting some like beyond the pale garbage, right?
Yeah, those aren't those people need hugs in their lives. They need a pat on the head and kisses on the forehead. But I wanted to circle back because Legday, you kind of mentioned something that kind of tied back into like the coaching discussion that I thought was actually super poignant. While doing a piece on Dante, I had dug up this quote from 9K when they were both on Chalk together, where 9K shares this quote where he goes, or Dante rather, kind of is extrapolating on this, and he goes, quote, "I would always watch Sinatra when I was spectating him in scrims in stage 4 of season 1. He'd always, or 9K would always be like, why do you want to be like Sinatra? Find your own style, because that's what makes you unique, what heroes you can play and what heroes can Sinatra play. I think that's how you become a good player, if you find your own style, right?" And that kind of like wraps what Yiska's saying and what you're saying kind of together, where it's like, yeah, there's already a Sinatra, there's already a Dante. So in a weird way, it kind of like goes back to like this American football commercial that was, I think, last Super Bowl, where like it's this brief story of this kid writing a letter to Tom Brady and him responding, where it's like, don't be like me, like be like you, like just be you. Like if you're going to be great, then you're going to be great on your own, and maybe you're going to surpass me, but like don't aim to be me. Like you do you, because that's how you're going to end up there. And as wholesome and as heartwarming as it is, I think that's just something I think everybody needs to hear every once in a while. Just lean into what you can do. Do what's good for you, what you're strong at. Find your style. Find who you are. But we do have some other things to talk about. Let's jump into, I know this is an absolute unlubricated transition, but the World Cup did get announced. The groups are available. And rightfully so, there is a little bit of uproar regarding some nations that were not immediately seeded into one of the I believe 6 groups. I think there's 2 groups per region, 2 for America, 2 for EMEA, and 2 for APAC. I think some of the ones that I remember off the top of my head were like Norway and Finland were not necessarily seeded, but there are, I believe, 4 wild card slots that are for debate. Yes, 4 additional spots for
Finland and Denmark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we have quite a few players there.
Pretty adept competitors in previous iterations of the Overwatch World Cup, and mainstays of a huge amount of both early and current pros. I think that Finland had an outsized an outsized footprint in early European Overwatch as well. We had teams like Giganti, Ninjas in Pajamas. That those were kind of the same team, but also had multiple iterations of kind of Finnish only rosters. So I think that it's not unreasonable that Finnish players have felt that their competitive history with Overwatch has been somewhat glossed over to not be instantly included in these groups over players who've maybe only ever had one pro. I think I know 2 Italian pros who were Dragon Eddy and Hearthbeat, both of whom, bless them, were very lovely. But the history of places like Finland and Denmark, in comparison, in terms of their contributions to high-level Overwatch, they're entirely different continents, really, in terms of how much they've done.
Yeah. I assume have they said how it's chosen? It just feels like it has to be like player base or something, right?
I would assume it's probably player base as a percentage of like target market.
Yeah. I don't hate that, because here's my problem, okay? Yes, you could just like come up with some convoluted system of like past pro player like participation. I even think to a degree, like just taking old World Cup performances into account is probably also a slightly better system. Once again, I don't think we have the luxury of competitive integrity at this point. Like,
yeah,
just like
I'm an angry old man who's shouting at this as like I want the best possible games, but
yeah,
it's World Cup at its core, even more than Overwatch League, has always been a huge marketing exercise, right? And that's something that has to color every single one of my opinions on this, even if I am still upset for the Scandinavians.
yeah.
yeah.
And keep in mind they still have a chance, right?
Anyway,
Yeah. I think so too.
I don't see them being beaten in the wild card round.
Yeah.
They're gonna make it.
No, I like there are just like you said, there are so many like just historical. I mean, even going back to like Finland. I think Finland versus South Korea was like a nail-bitingly close, like Game 5. I think in 2019. I think in Incheon.
That was where the server crashed as well.
Yeah, they had to restart. I think it was on like Horizon, if memory serves.
I think it was Nepal where the server
Yeah,
crashed.
you're right. And it was just like a weirdly close game that, like, again, must see Overwatch. You kind of knew where you were at that point, and yeah, it's as much as I sympathize with the competitive crowd. That's just, there are some underserved players and regions. It is tough. It is tough because in some ways this is maybe their only shot to really get out there and kind of showcase their talents, because sometimes, there just isn't enough. Film isn't the right word to say, but like there isn't enough of a spotlight sometimes put in Europe in particular. And I know that there are some very passionate people out there that are trying to drive change in that way. So you're not going without some absolute legends going to bat for you, but it is tough because, again, like you're saying, like it is kind of a marketing thing at the end of the day, and you kind of have to just in some ways bite the bullet. And it sucks because you don't want to have to go to a player and be like, yeah, sorry, like you're going to have to play through this open qualifier where there's only 4 slots. So, best of luck, because that's never a good thing. Just cuts down on their chances.
I'm biased towards Finland because they have one of my favorite narratives that I've ever crafted amongst them, which is for the ancestor gods of Reinhardt of Finland.
Sure, yeah.
Which is like the Fraggy, LH, Cloudy, and Milky Man, kind of the ancestry tree that they managed to bring out of Giganti, which was one of my absolute favorites to talk about back in the day. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like a huge footprint, I think, from a lot of those Scandinavian regions. They are like disproportionately affecting the history of the game. So it does suck to hear that they aren't like auto seeded.
Hey, conversely, like the opposite. To go to bat for places like Italy and Spain. I think that the best Overwatch player who's ever going to play probably hasn't even installed the game yet, providing we have a longevity of this franchise. Because every single generation of players who comes in is starting at a better baseline of understanding because of the resources that we have and the honing of Overwatch that's been done. Like, you watch Overwatch League Season 1 now, like, what the fuck were they thinking? What is going on strategically here? It's an absolute mess. And players who may have come in and created these kind of impressions in terms of player base that would have these nations be qualified into the groups are going to be starting at a much better level of understanding of this game so that they can peak even higher over time. And maybe this is going to be one of the best ways to like try and discover those players, like people like Patapan, Patapan and Mue coming out of, I believe, Thailand and Singapore or Hong Kong for Mue. Like, we'd never really heard of these players. Like, obviously, they'd played in Pacific contenders a little bit, but that was probably the lowest viewership region at the time, apart from maybe South America. Definitely. And we even met some very cool pro players out of Brazil and places. So there is definitely, I think, some value to giving a showcase to some of these lesser known regions and meeting their players compared to players that, admittedly, we've seen a lot of over the years, and we're all excited to actually see them play. And they're going to make it through the wildcards, of course they are. There's no teams that can compete with them, as far as I'm aware. So it might be cool to see those kind of teams actually in the groups.
I mean, to your point, like, we don't have Mickey without World Cup.
True.
You know, like there is something to serving even more underserved regions that don't really see much of a spotlight, that don't have like a ton of like historical pipelines, or, you know, either maybe former players or coaches to kind of like maybe even look up to say like, oh, I want to be like this player, or I want to like lead my nation, or I want to play for that team. You know, I always am surprised when I see people, you know, rally together around World Cup time and really, in a very positive way, kind of embrace the tribalism that is competition in some facets, in a productive way, I would say. I think that, like, for Overwatch's sake, at least from my experience, I can only speak anecdotally. I think people have been very positive in that way when pushing for, you know, trying to form like the best competitive roster for them, you know, trying to represent their country in a positive light, right? It's, you know, in some ways we might not have Hadi if not for like World Cup Germany, right? Really kind of not cut his teeth there. That's not necessarily fair to say, but I think that was maybe some people's first experiences with him, because again, T2 is not the most accessible. Sometimes people are just disillusioned, but like when you put the stakes in the line for the representation of your country or your region, and those bragging rights are on the line, you know, people tend to want to tune in. People tend to want to like rally behind some of those stars. Like you said, Dragon Eddie. I don't think like Dragon Eddie has his like place within the Overwatch League history books, if not for Overwatch World Cup. There's so many different and fun narratives and fun players that we don't get to discover if we don't have, you know, a very wide net. Obviously,
the biggest stories were definitely Kodak and Fusions.
Mm-hmm.
was Team Germany's, I think, biggest breakout. And Fusions, of course, Minecraft Steve himself, coming from defeating Team USA in 2018, I believe it was.
No,
was crazy.
Those are always the fun ones. I remember even like going back to like 2016 and like hearing some of like the Japanese players and people like rallying around, like I think AKTM at the time. Like that's just like a super old name that like nobody's gonna remember. But like people were like, I like that guy. He was super cool. His like Cassidy was super slick, and you just kind of make fans for these players. And like again, we need that stuff to kind of, you know, have Overwatch go for as long as it can. Forever would be nice. I'd like a forever in that answer box, but that's kind of TBD. So that's World Cup. Is there anything about the patch that kind of strikes your guys' fancy? Obviously, we did have a balance patch recently. We got some Orisa changes. Hog can't one shot anymore. Rip in chat for anybody. I guess if there's no chat, so rip in the comments or in Discord if like you're a Hog main and you're just feeling bad and need a hug. Like that's rough. But
you cry yourself to sleep like you should.
If you're a Hog main and you feel bad, you're where you belong.
Fair.
Welcome home.
That one for me was definitely very telling. I know that like the devs have been very public in talking about like, yeah, we're gonna have to do reworks. Yeah, Roadhog just doesn't like fit. I think they're kind of like dancing around it, if not just like outright saying it. I haven't been like super. I've got a lot of this like through like third party proxy at this point, but when you kind of gut a character like this, it does feel like there is like this looming, you know,
rework.
Big change, right? Like I think people are a little gun shy, especially when they come from like games like League of Legends in some facets where we've had to like form very specific definitions on like what is a rework and what is just like a redesign in some ways. This feels like, okay, we have to tone back a lot of power to implement more utility, to implement, you know, power at a later date, because at this point, is there a point to playing Roadhog? Like I get like the logic and like the developer comments where they're like, well, yeah, you like hook people into your team and like your team kills them. It's like, yeah, I don't know if you've played in Plat, guys. Like that's just not happening.
It's just part of a game dev pipeline, right? Like a rework requires one of the things we've got to talk about with League versus Overwatch is that League is a fantastically designed game, but visually it's a lot more simplistic seemingly. Like a lot more low res, you're far more zoomed out. Overwatch is a beautiful game with very high tier art, very high tier animation. And those things take a lot of fucking time to make.
Sure.
So when it comes to actually reworking characters, things like Orisa, with how she got the spear and the spins and stuff, this takes a lot of time. A lot more than changing numbers in code does. Yep. So it could be that people just like, maybe you nerf Hog, just it's kind of a halfway house thing to try and stop the amount of frustration you get when playing against Hog. And I think we're pretty much guaranteed to get a rework for him because he doesn't really fit into what the tank role does at the moment, which is that after he uses his hook, his ability to meaningfully impact fights outside of his meager range is very limited. And I think that one of the things that really defines a tank is like getting rid of the one shot was important, right? Sure. And one of the things that defines a tank was like that they aren't the player that can one shot someone. They're the player that gives an advantage to the rest of the team to be able to get those kills. And that's something that Roadhog, without his hook, is very bad at doing. Because after he uses his hook, he's just a shit Reaper for a while.
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
I think also like an underrated point here is like these changes almost feel like you're like putting the winter stuff, or you're bringing the winter clothes down from the cellar and like have your thick coat and everything, and you bring the summer, you know, like the flip flops or whatever into the basement because like you need a rotation of new clothes for whatever, you know, the weather is like. And the weather currently is we all fucking hate Roadhog. That's the weather.
Yeah.
And we gotta get that fucker out of here because it's A, frustrating to play against, and B, it's been going on for a decent amount of time, right? So I think more so than anything else, they probably just I think balance patches, the more I think about this, it's important that the most utility you get out of balance patches is when they change the meta and therefore create novelty, not bring about a perfect state of balance that you're never going to achieve anyway.
I think
that's a pretty good state of balance at the end of Overwatch 1. Like
True.
Like you could play pretty much anything, but we all still didn't enjoy it very much.
Here's the problem. That is true for a certain amount of time until either like someone figures something out about the game that's new and therefore like impacts the meta culturally and socially, because like meta is not just a gamble, it's also a social construct for a lot of it, right? Like if not, then we would all be playing Symmetra and Torbjorn right now, maximizing like tick, like 50. Dude, Symmetra is like at 55% win rate or something. From maybe the data is outdated from what I've seen, but like theoretically speaking, like we would all be maximizing. But I think it's just really what's fun and effective at a certain range, and also what am I less likely to be yelled at when I pick X0 in my team.
I mean, definitely there's that has to be part of the reason, but I think at like the top level there are like precedents outside of esport, or not that's not fair to say, not outside of esports, because I definitely stay within the realm to kind of point as to evidence as to like the weird peaks and valleys that even stagnantly, you know, developed games like Brood War, like Smash Melee, they still go through, as much as they are stretched out, right? Those wavelengths are stretched out in a lot of different ways. They still go through their peaks and their troughs. I think one of the big ones, at least that sticks out of my mind, most recently, I think there was a Sheik player for any of the Smash Melee players out there. Like apparently that was, you know, not a character that has ever like won a really, really big tournament, or at least as a solo character has won a big tournament. Went out there and did work. Credit to, I think, Jmook for winning, I think, Genesis, whatever number. And like going back to like Brood War, a game that like historically has just been untouched by, you know, Blizzard devs for a very long time. You have, you know, players like Savior reinventing some of these matchups where like people just assumed it was just lost in certain situations, that he flips it on his head and kind of like makes this legendary, you know, reinvention of the game in some ways. So as much as we crave novelty, I still think if we were to never touch Overwatch again and we just ended Overwatch 1 and that was just the balance patch that we got forever, Like we still get that wavelength
Eventually.
of peaks and troughs. It's just stretched out a little bit. Like for example, with goats, right? I think we were just on the cusp of like seeing the breakthrough,
Solving it.
In some ways, yeah, solving goats with like the stage 3 Shock and Shanghai matchup, where Shanghai comes out with like the multi DPS stuff that China was kind of innovating with. They kind of, you know, bring it into the fold. Shock has to adapt to it. They're like, whoa, like, you know, goats isn't necessarily pairing well into this. They have a good read on things. We kind of have to mirror them because lo and behold, Overwatch is very symmetrical in some ways. Or it's a strategy to just, I guess, be symmetrical. And unfortunately, we got Rollock immediately after, but like that wavelength of balance and imbalance and imbalancing itself back into balancery, right? Like it tends to happen if we just let it go through its course. It's just really, really drawn out. Whereas when the developers come in and just manufacture it, it gets really, really tight together and you get all these spikes and it bounces all over the place.
Conversely to that, though, I think the devs have to balance a lot more actively at the moment because, like you said, the best minds will solve it, but the best minds are fucking busy, mate. And we aren't seeing what those best minds are cooking up, which means that there's not a lot of top-down meta influence at the moment. So what works in ranked is generally what's going to stay. Like, people get farmed by Roadhog, they're like, that's pretty good. I'll try that.
Yeah.
And it means that the more advanced methods you might have to like try and counter for Roadhog from people who play coordinated strategies are going to be inherently inaccessible because of the ecosystem in which it's evolving, where you have consistently rotating teammates with consistently rotating specialities. So I think that it's necessary for devs to try and be a little bit heavy-handed with balance in these inter-season arenas.
Oh, definitely. And I think there is something to be said to create a healthy environment for everybody to play in, because you don't want just Kiriko being an insta-lock every time you load up into a ranked game because they're just too good not to play, right? Like, yes, at
like
the
if
highest
you're not
level,
playing Kiriko, you're at a disadvantage.
Exactly. And like, obviously, that I think, you know, I won't speak for you guys, but I don't think the changes to her were, you know, enough. I think she needs a little bit more of a punish window for a lot of those cooldowns. She does just seem to just be this slippery little devil that just always gets out and always has Suzu and, you know, just is repositioning forever. But in the same way that like Roadhog, for a game that went through such a fundamental shift going to 5v5, Roadhog was always an edge case in Overwatch 1 and now kind of became a problem child for Overwatch 2. Where the kit just doesn't fit anymore. There isn't like that extra tank to kind of, you know, cover the option that maybe the other enemy team plays a Roadhog and maybe like goes on a flank, and, you know, we have a utility piece to kind of rotate around and you know, flex and cover that. That doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist inversely as well, where it's like, well, now my tank is just the solo hog player from Overwatch 1 that's just flanking and evermooring people, and it just doesn't, that's not fun to play with either. So a rework, it feels imminent. I don't know if you guys saw the math on the Sojourn stuff. Apparently that's like both, it seemed like a shift of power in some ways.
It's a buff and a nerf, but it's mostly nerf, but in some ways, like if you're a dude that shoots Orisa, you're buffed. Basically,
like, you just get more rails.
You get to generate more rails because you're now generating not based on damage that you do. You just have a flat amount, and like if you just shoot into armor body of Orisa, like you're now generating more than previously. And I think shield is unchanged actually.
If I can cook the sauce for a second on Kiriko,
sure.
I know that this isn't a patch balance podcast, but I think that you could do I haven't observed how the new recovery time for a Fuda impacts the overall healing output. I can say, as someone who played about 10 hours of Kiriko in ranked, I was averaging 12k heals per 10, which is atrociously high. But now with a 40% higher like recovery rate, that might go down significantly. I think that, like you said, her ability to not be locked down is probably the biggest thing. And I think that they should just change the Afuda so that for Kiriko it only cleanses her rather than makes her immune to everything, and then she's only got one proper escape tool rather than two, which I think is a little bit excessive when it comes to a hunting game.
Yeah, because you do want to get those cooldowns out. As much as this is an FPS game, there is, we want to eat at those resources, and if those windows are not open, or if those windows are maybe or those abilities rather a little too strong, then maybe we have to rework them. And I get where Blizzard's coming from with a lot of these changes. I think with Roadhog in particular, where it's like reworking a hero feels a whole lot harder than just making a new one, right? Like even going through some of like the thought patterns of like, oh well, what if we went back to like the weird like vape cloud that we had in like the experimental patch? It's just like, okay, well maybe that's just better served on a new hero. And it's like even design or like redesigning a hero, you still have to kind of in some ways respect what was already created, because if you can't just like throw on like a shoulder mounted bazooka to Roadhog and just call it a day. It's like well, that's just not Roadhog. That's like somebody else. It's like, how do we? There are limitations to that, and kind of the flip side of that coin with Kiriko, it's like this is a super popular character. We don't want to just gut them to gut them, so it does feel a little light-handed. I would definitely say it's not enough, but I think. I'll just kind of echo what I think Platchat said. Like, there's probably more coming with like the new season coming out in God knows how many days. So probably expect that.
New season might come with a new support hero as well, which would be particularly good because the thing that we also need to take into account is this is a live service now. New hero good equals money.
Yes.
Because I'm going to play this hero. I wish for a nice skin for this new hero to be displayed while I'm playing it. This is excellent. And, like, the new heroes being good is what sells battle passes to get those heroes quicker. That's a debate that I'm sure you guys have done to death over multiple episodes. But the fact is that's the economy that we're living in now. And that's what keeps the game running. So the new heroes being good is almost a necessity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of do want to push it. In like the card game version of push, where like the newly developed card set is just a little bit power crept, so that like, people want to buy it because they want to replace their old cards, and it is this like vicious industrial video game complex in some ways where you just kind of have to keep pushing the button. But as Eric is screaming at us in chat, it does. I don't believe, and again, maybe the public can correct us if we're wrong. The next season is a map season. The season after is a new hero, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe. I lost track when they did both in this
season.
So which one are we on now? Are we on a map season or a hero season?
They've all... It just should be a new hero. I'd love it for it to be a new hero, but alas, we're just going to have to wait. Hopefully, maybe at the beginning of the season, we start to see like the Kiriko teases where, back when, Overwatch 2 is announced, Yiska obviously very aptly noted that like there was like the... what was it? There was something that I felt like you spotted early on with like the Overwatch 2 stuff that was like, oh, that's really odd. Like, why is that like that? Or there was some indication.
You mean? Or
I don't know if it was 5v5 in particular, but was it Kiriko speed boost or like the new hero? There was something regarding the new hero that like people were quick to. I don't know who I should attribute that to, but hopefully some of those Easter eggs come out because I
weird think... Overwatch 2 tangent.
Yeah.
Do you think that the move to 5v5 has done well in terms of being able to characterize a tank as a leader rather than that being a shared position? I think that it's definitely done better for esports photography, where you can have your centralized player who it allows you to like create a highlight in a picture, which I think is really cool for just the surrounding media of esports.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wonder what it's done in like characterization of tanks, and I think that we discussed Reiner earlier is really good for how it managed to sort of like paint Reiner as a leader and kind of almost a monolithic figure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you mean strictly like from a esports perspective or generally in ranked? Like, do you...
I think from an esports perspective.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think theoretically speaking, like some of the biggest storylines this year, other than proper, were tank related, right? Like we had Reiner, we had Hanbin, we had Fearless coming in during the final. We had someone. Smurf popped off. I feel like we probably had more in the top MVP candidates than ever for the tank role.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Mhm.
So
And
yeah.
rightfully so, because it's so like the hero pool is not huge, but now that it's only one person having to play the entire roster of the tank heroes now, like that becomes almost like a DPS feat where it's like you need to do it all because these metas are, like you said, a gamble, and sometimes you are going to have to go to the Winston, and then you're going to have to go to the Rein, and then you're going to have to go to the Junker Queen, and God forbid Ramatra is, as good as people say as they are. Like you're going to have to bounce around, and that's just a one-man job until, you sign other people to do it.
Yeah, I think one thing the role suffered from historically was that tank players always were talked about as dependents rather than as individuals, I think. Like, even in support, like flex supports would get their highlights, DPS players would have their highlights by themselves, and we were rarely talked about in the context of like what they do with their DPS partner. Obviously there were examples of that happening with famous duos, but like when we acclaimed DPS players, it was often by themselves rather than as a duo. And I think the tanks finally got to like have a share of that limelight where like they could be good as themselves rather than be good as part of 50% of a unit, which I think was a good change for season, which I've completely tangented to some degree.
No, I think it's
good.
definitely something that like touches at the heart of a lot of like content that, or maybe not necessarily content, but I know that Yiska had like a very interesting like thought piece way back when we had flex tanks and we were trying to decide like who was, there's this big community, kerfuffle about like who was the best flex tank ever, and it's like it is just such an underserved role when it comes to both narrative and like actual analysis around it that makes it really hard to kind of figure it out. And to what you're saying, Legday, like it is much easier to like parse the game, and because of that, and because of tanks being just a single role now instead of having a partner, like you do get to see those moments, you do get to kind of, it's a lot of different things kind of stacked on top of it and one another. Like Overwatch 2 is a like infinitely easier game to view. The decision as both like a leader of the team, but also like a leader in these team fights where it's like tanks were always setting the pace, but it was difficult to tell who and where was setting the pace because sometimes you had metas where the flex tanks were taking a lot of dives, and sometimes it was the main tanks on the Winstons and the wrecking balls, and it's like it's very clear and very focused on who's doing what and who's setting the pace, right? Like it'd be very weird if League of Legends had two junglers, right? And there was just stuff happening all over the place, and neither jungler got to really like feast on the fruits of, the responsibility of setting the tempo of the game. Because there isn't an additional tank anymore, in a lot of different ways and a lot of different interpretations of the word leader. Yeah, I would say 100%. And I think, like Yiska said, it's no surprise that coincidentally we have our hotties, our someone's the Smurfs, like everybody kind of, all of the tank boats were risen with this encroaching Overwatch 2 tide that everybody gets to kind of be a little bit more important. Everybody gets a piece of that pie because it's just more, it's not necessarily more impactful, but it's a lot of different facets all working together to make tank absorb more of that spotlight, if that makes sense. I would definitely agree. I think that's a well appreciated tangent. Yiska?
Yeah.
Thoughts there?
No, I agree. I think it's probably also one that works just on so many multiple levels that I don't know. I see the threads. I see that whenever something changes, you probably feel bad, especially if the thing that was changed away really was the thing that resonated with you. But there's almost no doubt in my mind that was the right decision to go 5v5, right? And I personally have way more fun, even though I notice also once again a decline in my play. I think season 1, I was like I definitely made it to 90. I think it was 110 or something. Now I'm like level 60, and I'm probably not going to get much further. I'm not probably not going to get even the legendary skin at this pace, right? So
I feel like that's just like okay for Blizzard games in general, where it's like, yeah, you probably should just go play other games, and then you know what? When the new hero comes out, we're gonna go back and play Overwatch 2. Like it's okay to play other
yeah,
games.
but that sucks. Like for your esports title.
It does in some ways. It does. I don't think it does in others. I think it's good for everybody to have those peaks and troughs. Like obviously we want to keep everybody around as long as possible, but I I'm very hesitant to want to like scramble for the attention much in the way that like a very not a contemporary, but like another like piece of the Blizzard puzzle, like World of Warcraft, for example, like historically always tried to battle for your attention. It forced you like in very insidious ways to like have to log in and do your chores or you felt right. Like that's why games like Final Fantasy and a lot of these like more niche MMOs kind of like peaked up at the time.
And I know that MMOs are the root of all evil in gaming. Basically.
Agreed, very very much agreed. But we still
they were the testing grounds.
They really were, and it's really gross. If you want to get like really sad about why you do the things that you do, look into like the there was something recently that was published that I'll have to find it. Anyways,
FOMO.
I studied. No, it was like this study into like the dopamine drip in like modern video game design, and like how it's like just really gross when you look at it, and like you looking like how the sausage is made. But anywho, yeah, I don't think it's good for a game to like demand your attention all the time. I think it's a good that you want to have competition in this like attention marketplace where it's like, yeah, okay, we lost you for the map season. That's good feedback for the devs to say, hey, maps are no good. We need more content. You know, there's no better feedback than just the bottom line being slashed at, right? And saying, yeah, no, this isn't enough. It's not enough to just have a map. We need something else. It probably can't be another hero, as much as to the chagrin of Yiska and maybe other people in our community. But there has to be something else, maybe. And we'll probably all come back with the new Overwatch hero. Everybody's going to want to play the Ramatra 2.0. Everybody's going to want to play the new Roadhog. Everybody's going to want to play this new support hero if it's a support hero. Like, and that's okay. I think that's okay, at least personally. Legday, is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. Like, I'm trying to think of ways that you could like have your. The real problem for Blizzard here is I'm tempted to call them off seasons, the seasons that we're not getting a new hero, and that's not great for your engagement feed, right? Yeah. So I'm trying to think of ways that you could like have an off season that's engaging, and like I'm going to the cookhouse here. I'm thinking about like in your off season, you actually make it a tournament season instead, where like you have your regular season that brings up a new hero, and then you have kind of like, you're gonna really have to forgive me for saying this phrase, but the refractory competitive periods. Like where there's a separate competitive queue where like you can 5-stack and it's got its own tournament bracket, so you can kind of like have like your in-game like team season before you go back to like having a hero season. But honestly, like I'm not a game system designer, and I can tell you, like, to return to the root of all evil conversation, I suffered from major MMO addiction, man. I had like a year and a half of game time on one character over the course of about 3 years. Like my life was entirely ruled by MMO.
Star Wars guy, right?
Yeah, I was one of the #1 PvPers in the world at one point. That's fair. That's for Legday lore.
Well, facts.
Star Wars: The Old Republic. I played essentially the equivalent of a warrior. Like a melee DPS and tank class. That's what's actually got me into Overwatch, because I saw Reiner. I was like, as a raid leader and a melee tank, I understand this. And that's one of the ways that Overwatch really managed to speak to me and kind of help break out of that addiction by creating new addictions. Thank you, gaming industry. Very cool.
Yeah. No, pretty much same with WoW back in the day for sure. Fuck, I had a point. Yeah, but I think like once again, like you gotta compete with those guys. And here's the thought I had. I think eventually what probably will happen if they decide on a sequenced rollout of the we now call it campaign apparently, that's
Mhm.
just going to be like in between seasons. I think there's enough overlap. We're probably just going to get PvE during those hero off seasons, right? And then you can introduce a new hero, and that then expands on lore, and then you get the campaign on that particular hero. Like long term thinking is my hypothesis here. That, you know, like the content pipeline, I think that's also makes sense. I think there will be a healthy amount of overlap between people that play the PvP and the PvE, and just feed off each other in terms of the content pipeline. I'm still intrigued if at all this PvE aspect can contribute towards keeping people in the system, keeping people engaged, and having that be a boost for esports. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, if the IP is big, then by nature, our little fraction of that puzzle has to increase at least a little bit. Not a
I'm
huge
just
amount.
hoping that Blizzard's leverage the resources that they have, which is an entire other studio, which has done some of the greatest raid and dungeon design in the history of video games.
Right.
Like what I'm my fucking pipe dream is we get Mythic Dungeon Invitational for Overwatch raids.
Yes.
Like, I don't know if there are going to be Overwatch raids, but like we're looking at a long-term live service game, so surely there are going to be raid-esque instances of PvE, and we can speedrun those. We can gamify the game itself, and it might be that we expand our esport instead to have multiple things like Atlanta Reigns raid team.
Sure.
Do you roll the same players for both? Are there going to be some teams where they feel the same team for both of these kind of content pieces, or maybe where they have separate teams like we had academy teams before? We're going to have raid teams now instead. I'm hoping that that's an ecosystem that will happen and that we can develop over the coming years to really create some like cross-pollination between PvE enjoyers and those who might be like, okay, cool, fine. I'll watch Overwatch League because I like Dallas Fuel's raid team. Let's see how they're doing in Overwatch League.
Real talk, like we had this discussion here on the podcast, I think, with Avril, where I was like, I could totally see that being bigger than the Overwatch League, right?
Yeah.
Like, depending on how they nail the PvE, I think as a casual experience, there's probably way less performance anxiety there because you're playing with your friends against the AI or
the computer.
Right? Like that's a very much a different position. I feel like a lot of the quick play players that just vibe with how the game feels and the lore and the universe, those guys will just seamlessly transition, and I expect those guys to be a big part of the community, just based on also what transitionary properties we have between like casual Overwatch audience and esports being like a bit shit, given everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Like,
I imagine, given like there's a huge amount of the gaming population that like sees a PvP only game, and they're like,
they're like, not for me.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
But to to your point with like the Mythic Dungeon Invitational, I think that the idea that like a community or a game can either through ideally a grassroots method where it becomes like this popular thing that, you know, the developer takes attention to and starts throwing money at, and it becomes this, you know, success or this hit, right? Like much in the same way of like the race to world first for like all the new like WoW raids, and maybe even some of the Final Fantasy raids that are, I think, getting a little bit more attention now. Like I think it's really fun to have competition shifted in a different, you know, lens where it's like Yiska said, it's not necessarily just, you know, player versus player, but it's player versus environment, where it's a race to the to the finish line, or it's, you know, how fast you can complete something. Like there are these different transmutations of like the definition of competition that I think a game like Overwatch is desperately needed, that comes with PvE, and that probably, going back to like the off-season analogy, when it comes to like these seasons of Overwatch the game, where they're probably just they've designed these like this blueprint or this roadmap the way that it is because in all likelihood a lot of these off seasons are probably going to be PvE drops, right? It's going to probably be a PvE drop followed by a hero drop, followed by another PvE drop, followed by another hero drop. Yeah, it sucks that we have to just wait for another shot in the arm, but if it follows that kind of cadence, I think we're perfectly fine. And I hate saying this too, but we might just have to wait till another, October when, PvE comes out. And that's just me referencing like the PvP, like early access release date.
I think PvE will be an amazing content opportunity for teams as well, because PvP, the content only exists in the flashpoint of our competitive engagements, right? Because you only, like, as a team trying to create content, when you only control like 50% of the participants, your ability to craft content carefully is very much limited. Whereas with PvE, because you control all the variables and there's one constant you're going against, it allows you to augment that experience for comedic or for exciting purposes like a world first. Like, you can be like, can we clear this raid with 5 tracers? And that's a 15-minute video where you can be engaging. And because like PvE doesn't need like a big arena to happen in, and because you don't need another team to get the reactions from, you can film that in your scrim space. And you can be with the players, because guess what? If you don't win in that funny video because you're poking a camera in a player's face, it doesn't matter. And like, there are so many avenues of content which can't be pursued by these teams, just because in PvP, obviously, you need 100% focus on the game, because you're not going up against the same thing over and over again that you've practiced previously. Okay. So I think that's going to be potentially a really good content avenue for some of our teams to increase their ability to both invest in and, more importantly, see a return from Overwatch content.
Legday, are you saying that Overwatch League teams are going to make guides? The buzzword of every written 100%. Content consumer.
Yeah,
the guides are going to be bigger than all the interviews. The guides, how to be.
Yeah, Joe, 100%.
I know.
Competition. It's going to be so much bigger.
Yeah, that's like the new frontier of like OWL content. Is like you have some of the most talented players in the world, that bar none, right? These are very, very talented players. So how do you maximize the return on these players with like a pre-established format that we know works? Guides, like every time I look at like a new freelance opportunity, it's like, oh, can you write guides? It's like, I guess, like, what do you want a guide for? Like how to do X or Y or the best settings for this or that. It's like, it's something that needs to be searched. People have this like thirst for it. So how do we take the Toronto Defiant and put them into, Overwatch? What was it? What's the PvE stuff that we had that we go back?
Rising.
Yeah. For example, like taking that, like, how do we beat that on like mythic difficulty? And like, what's the most optimal way? Like, how do we just throw like the best players in the world at that and just like give the tools, the tricks, the tips, the guide to the public, and that just becomes the new thing. Because again, like there's such a clamoring for PvE that people are going to want to do this. So how do we get ahead of it? That's the ticket. That's the golden goose. Anybody who's first, like out west, like it's a gold rush. The first team to put out a guide how to beat, Storms Rising or this, that, the other thing, like they're gonna make so much. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Eric kind of brightly points out, like CarQ, for example, for the Defiant, sure. Like putting out all these like tip videos and driving educational content, right? Like there's a reason why there's a reason why you see him everywhere, right? It's successful. People need this stuff. People want this stuff. They have a thirst for this knowledge, and it's successful.
Yeah. No, I think that's very likely to happen. And the thing is, my question is the best Overwatch League player also the best PvE player?
Hard to say. And
how quickly are they discredited in that? Right.
It's definitely a different tool set, right? I think it has to probably be the case as we kind of wrap up that, like, I think initially, like the first some of the best pros are probably going to be some of the best PvE players. Not to get like too like theory crafty. But yeah, like given enough time, I have to imagine that there is like a certain skill set that PvE demands that maybe like the pro players just don't have the time for, right? Maybe they just don't have the time to like grind out all like the niche, you know, mechanics that you need to do when it comes to PvE, or like how to manipulate the AI or what have you, that, you know, maybe they get outpaced in some ways, and maybe we see like a new generation of, you know, pro Overwatch players, like they were saying, like kind of crop up in a different, you know, lateral avenue that only feeds into the greater IP that benefits everybody, right? In the big umbrella.
This is the best cure for my doomerism. Talking about PvE and Overwatch, I'm not gonna lie.
Hey, it's been a blast, and I'm excited to see what this PvE looks like, because it comes from a developer that has done, I think it comes from a group of developers that has done extremely good things. I think people used to meme on like the Call of Duty experience, but let's be honest, like these look great, right? Your Blizzard obviously comes from like a legacy of creating incredible PvE content with Diablo and WoW and all this stuff. So like you said, hopefully they have at least an iota of that in this Overwatch landscape that people really want to learn more about and experience the story to. So just to tickle my ego pickle, I don't know how familiar are you with the new Vancouver roster, Legday?
I'm going to click on it now.
Let's get a live reaction of the Vancouver Titans, and then I'll tell you.
Let's have a look. Aspire, Punk, Faith, Crimzo, and shit. How the fuck did this happen? Okay,
well,
I like Punk.
Is their coach, so they brought over a lot of those former Boston players. Baroy, the new GM, so has that Boston connection, so that should probably explain some of those names. And then Sugar Free being the wild card, the NA Golden Boy that has been kind of the prodigy in waiting. So initial reactions.
Lenny himself. This is a roster where the theoretical peaks, if they combine, are very nice.
Agreed.
This is a roster where I think we're gonna see a theoretical peak meet reality quite hard.
Now I have a going
think that each of these players can pop off.
Agreed, 100%. Like you give Punk the Sigma, I think Sugar Free has a lot going for him that I think people have been, you know, cold to. I think that iron has been cooled a little bit, but I still think there's a lot of talent there. I trust a lot of those former gatekeepers that, you know, brought him on, the Brads. You know, this kid's got some gas in the tank. I've got a bet with Yiska that I believe the Vancouver Titans are going to finish 7th or above this season in the regular season.
Look at his face, Joe. That's in your soul, asshole.
So you're not as keen, is what I'm hearing. Not so much. It's okay to say no.
I'm not gonna lie. I don't know enough of the landscape at the moment, but
that's also a very
man. Like, so who do they beat to get to 7?
That's the question. Here we go.
That is a great question,
right?
Because like, are they beating
Get ready
London?
for the
I don't
ass
think
pull.
so.
Okay, so here's my logic, right? Because I think I don't have to go too far to convince you. Okay.
I'm open to being convinced.
Okay.
Let's look at the gimmies, right? I think New York for all of their.
We don't know anything about. Yeah.
Vegas is a gimme.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe. In Empress we trust. Yeah.
And that takes us to what?
That's 2 gimmies. Okay, that takes us to 11. Then I think there's a big middle pool of just gray area that we tend to have, right? I think in most Overwatch League seasons, there is this like unstratified middle group that just trades amongst themselves, that teams like London, teams like Florida can punch way above their weight in certain metas, like you said, that like will have this team peak. Is it a gamble on my end? 100%. When you have certain players that do excel, that have punched up in seasons past, the Aspires, the Punks, I think Faith, I'm trusting in Baroy here. I think that, you know, the kid has more to show than maybe what we've seen. that this is a team that can punch up, excel in certain metas, maybe in certain stages, and then finish at a cool 7th place and win me.
Wait, hold on. I see what you did there. We still need 4 more names by your... Yeah.
Sure. So, for example, I think they could probably trade and maybe have a positive win rate against the Florida Mayhem, depending on how...
Cap.
Right?
10th.
I think London could be in that same realm of, like, we could trade with them. Justice, another team that...
Yeah.
Will have
okay.
London,
Okay. No. Okay.
I think London, they could...
I'll give you Justice at this point. Yeah.
Justice, I think, is almost gimme territory.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Florida is a battle. And then it's a gamble on who they upset, right? Like, I'm asking for an upset, but, I think it's doable. I think it's definitely...
You need 2 upsets, right?
Probably. I don't know how to do that, so I'm just going to hope that it's...
Oh, this is... Do you want to start calling me Lord now?
So
No.
I just want to clarify your bet here.
Yeah.
Is this 7th in North America?
Correct, yes.
At the end of a regular season?
Regular season.
So what you're telling me is this roster of 5 players is going to be consistently good enough to get 7th across 4 metas?
Not necessarily.
Make him feel really bad.
7th, but they have to finish 7th. So, like, they could get, like...
Yeah, at the end of
season.
And 5th, and maybe they win a stage. Like, God forbid they win a stage. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they don't have to be 7th over the entire duration of the season, just at the end.
Yeah.
And
so
you're telling me a roster that has no main tank and very little capacity for double flex support.
Yeah.
Across four metas.
Okay, to be fair, I'm hoping that this is a team that is done building.
Get him.
And has to fill out some more, because I agree. Like, I'm banking on the fact that
I'll give you they could get 7th in the first stage.
I'll take it. That's the positivity I'm looking for. Like that. That's what I need to keep me going. We gave you PvE. You give me some copium, okay?
But I think over the course of the entire season, if this is the roster, I don't think
that's
the consistency will be there. Like, I don't think that London's gonna be, London's gonna probably have 1 bad stage. Yeah. I'd guess. I don't think that that's a team that's gonna be popping off all the time. I think they're going to be more consistently good, but they would take 7th or higher at least. And then we've got a load of teams that I don't think these guys have the depth to really hold a candle to.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. As it stands right now, again, I'm banking on them not being finished. But as it stands right now, gun to head, if you actually had to, like, get my honest opinion of this roster versus what we've seen thus far, yeah, of course not. I don't believe that. Like, that's a tough sell. I'm assuming they have a couple more moves to make. That's my take on it.
Like, Joe is on that amount of copium that he just hopes that at this point, like, miraculously, there will only be 10 teams in NA.
I'm miraculously hoping Vancouver Titans sign Reiner tomorrow, right? That would be...
You're on so much copium.
Reiner miraculously becomes someone who can play in the Overwatch League.
Crazy.
And doesn't go to Toronto.
Woo! I mean, that Vancouver money, am I right, guys? No,
I'm not going to lie. Vancouver's more likely to lose Aspire or Trigger Free to Toronto than they are to get Reiner.
No, it's it's a fringe pick. It's a fringe bet. The Chengdu have won me fringe bets in the past.
Right.
Let history stand. We did win that bet.
Like, you already got a gimme by Justice not getting Fitz and Iris. Like,
true.
That would have also eliminated the
universe conspires to help me, this guy. As much as you try.
I think the universe has 1 or 2 more plays in your favor, and I still don't think you get there. Like...
We'll see. It's definitely something that we're gonna watch very closely. But as it stands now, I think we're coming up to the end of the hour. Legday, has been an absolute treat to have you on.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can have you on closer to the season start. I know I want to do some content leading up to the season, so hopefully I want to bring you back in and get a definitive take, maybe do some power rankings. But as it stands now, what's going on with you? Where can people find you? Are you working on any projects yourself? Anything going on?
Currently working on a project to turn myself into a VTuber, so
Sick.
that's fun.
Base.
Let's
Yeah,
go.
check that out at
Supremacy.
twitch.tv/Legday Gaming at some point whenever it's ready. Which should hopefully be soon. I'm pretty proud of what we've done so far, and I'm working on a big video project because I'm hoping to like use it as a proof of concept to do some more content for OWL. It's an internet historian style video about the effort of competitive Overwatch to build the Overwatch League logo on r/place.
Oh.
There you go.
I'm here for that. That's dope.
How hard is it to get a VTuber avatar going?
It's easy when you've got an artist for a girlfriend. I'll put it that way.
Base. Okay. Like nice. Good dating strategy.
Slight cheating, you know.
Yeah.
Pardon?
For sure. Good dating strategy. That's.
Oh yeah. Maybe one day we'll become the first VTubing caster for Overwatch League because they've been reaching out to some VTubers for the co-streams last year. So who knows? Maybe they're interested in that kind of thing. Get down with the Zoomers.
They do love their VTubers.
True.
That's for damn sure. And yeah, I've seen quite a few. Like I think I've seen a couple on match day. You know, co-streaming the matches, and that was kind of interesting to see. Interesting to hear some of their, you know, what they thought of things. So very cool, very cool. Yiska, what's up with you?
So I'm still like trying to get the player panel going. It's getting there. We're finalizing a date. I got some pretty cool players to talk about. You know, all kinds of issues and or questions, you know, that a player is confronted with across the season, across, you know, this particular season. We'll talk about game balance for sure. So that's coming down. Then I actually like Legday. Like I'm also, look at me reaching out live on broadcast, but I'm planning like a casters panel. I haven't reached out to anyone. I just want to, you know, have a brainstorm what kind of the topics I want to talk about there. Then I'll probably break it down, and we'll have like an analytical and shoutcaster. So like the storyteller panel, and then the analytical panel. Certainly, I want to talk to coaches on a panel. I think that could be very interesting. You know, get Chris, get Face, get, you know, Junkbug, whoever wants to talk to me on a panel and talk about the challenges of like roster building, whatnot. And then, yeah, the interviews are also coming. Like I feel like currently a lot of folks are like getting ready to travel. They're not as accessible. I think like we're slowly starting up scrims. I think only one team is currently actively scrimming. So I think we're getting there. Then, and of course, the new season format I expect to be announced pretty soon. I'm really interested to see the community's reception.
True. Yeah, we're getting closer to, you know, hopefully getting some announcements. I know Sean Miller's been cooking up some stuff, so hopefully we get that coming out soon, because that definitely helps everybody, you know, once we know when the season you know, whenever that starts. Yeah, much in the same way myself, working on content. I gotta pee real bad, doing some historical stuff leading into the season, doing some narrative stuff, you know, all that flowery garbage. But yeah, that's pretty much it for us, I think. Thank you, Legday, again for coming on and
thanks for having me.
Chewing the fat, I believe is the saying. Definitely gonna have to bring you back on. It was a blast. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Episode 280 is in the books. Be kind, give your friends a hug. Bye.
Bye.